We're looking now at a big topic, a huge topic, the Ark of the Covenant. What happened to the Ark of the Covenant, and where are the Ten Commandments? We know that when Jesus died, the veil of the temple was ripped from top to bottom, and if you'd been standing there on that day and looked through into the most holy place, you would have seen the Ark of the Covenant was not there. It had disappeared in the time of Jeremiah and the Babylonian invasion. So where was the Ark hidden? And we're going to talk about that right now. Now, to the north of the Old City is an interesting landmark called the Place of a Skull. Even today, this is on Skull Hill. And when this was identified in the 1800s as a likely candidate for Golgotha, General Gordon, who spotted this, began looking in the area for a tomb. And shortly before he came along, a tomb had been discovered, the Garden Tomb. And this is in close proximity on the north side of Jerusalem, the skull face and the Garden Tomb. Now, what had happened to the Ark of the Covenant? A popular view, well known today, is it's in Axum, Ethiopia, in this building here. All we know from inspiration is this: the temple was destroyed, and the Bible lists what the Babylonians took back to Babylon when the temple was destroyed. It lists here the pillars of brass, the brazen sea, lots of little details like the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, the spoons, the vessels of brass, etc. Lots of little details that were taken by the Babylonians back to Babylon. But conspicuously absent from this list are the major items: the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the altar of incense. All those main items are not mentioned. So what happened to them? Well, the Bible doesn't say. We do have a clue, if you like, in the uninspired Apocrypha. Now, this is from the book of Maccabees. We know the Apocrypha is not inspired, but it does contain some useful history. And this quote talks about this. It speaks about when the prophet Jeremiah came, he found a hollow cave wherein he laid the tabernacle and the ark and the altar of incense, and so stopped the door. And then it says, some of those that followed him came to mark the way and couldn't find it, which when Jeremiah perceived that, he blamed them or told them off, saying, as for that place, it shall be unknown until the time that God gather his people again together and receive them to mercy. Now, how do we know that the Ark of the Covenant was still in Jerusalem just before the Babylonians came, and hadn't actually been taken centuries before off to Ethiopia, as the popular idea goes? Well, here's a clue. In the book of Ezekiel, it speaks about, not long before the Babylonian army came down, that the glory of the Lord went up from the cherub and stood over the threshold of the house. And the house was filled with the cloud, and the court was full of the brightness of the Lord's glory. Here's the Shekinah rising up off the Ark of the Covenant, from the cherub, it says, on the Ark of the Covenant. And then, if you keep reading the story, the glory of the Lord departed from off the threshold and stood over the cherubims. And then in the next chapter, chapter 11, the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood on the mountain which is on the east side of the city. That's the Mount of Olives. And then it departed. So here's the point. The Shekinah glory was still there in the temple, moving about and leaving the city in the time of Ezekiel. This is just before the Babylonian army came down. So clearly the Shekinah was there not long before the Babylonian army came. The story that it went to Ethiopia relies on it being taken from the temple a long time before that. And it was done by a supposed son of Solomon, a son to the Queen of Sheba. Now, if that was the case, this son, who supposedly, this is how the story goes, was going to be given a replica of the ark to take back to his home country. He then took that replica and swapped it for the real one, and took the real ark back to Ethiopia and put the copy. Now, the problem with that is this: to do so, he'd have to ask the Shekinah glory, please, can you hop off the ark for a moment while I take the ark away and put this other one in place, and then the Shekinah comes back down on this copy. Does that make any sense at all? Clearly not. But here we find in Ezekiel the Shekinah was there right up to just before the Babylonian invasion. So the idea that it went to Ethiopia doesn't fit the Bible evidence here. Now when the Babylonian army came, Nebuchadnezzar's army, the captain of the guard, Nebuzaradan, it says, burnt the house of the Lord. Now what happened to the Ark of the Covenant? Now we have a great clue here. The book called Prophets and Kings by Ellen G. White, she said, among the righteous still in Jerusalem, this is just as the Babylonian army is coming in, to whom had been made plain the divine purpose, were some who determined to place beyond the reach of ruthless hands, that's the Babylonian army, the sacred ark containing the tables of stone, on which had been traced the precepts of the Decalogue. This they did. So here were people in Jerusalem who had understood what was going to happen through the prophet Jeremiah, no doubt, what was going to happen. So they took the ark, and it says, with mourning and sadness, they secreted the ark in a cave, where it was to be hidden from the people of Israel and Judah because of their sins, and was to be no more restored to them. That sacred ark is yet hidden. It has never been disturbed since it was secreted. Now that was published in 1915. So 100 years ago, Ellen White could write that that ark was hidden in a cave by righteous men who were in Jerusalem at the time of the invasion of the Babylonians, and that ark is still hidden undisturbed 100 years ago. Now, is there any indication and inspiration that the ark will be found again? That's a big question. We read this in the book of Exodus, chapter 31. This is speaking about God giving to Moses on Mount Sinai the tables of stone. It says, he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone written with the finger of God. So clearly this is talking about the Bible text, the very stones that God wrote for Moses and gave to him on Mount Sinai. Now Ellen White quotes that passage here in one Bible commentary, page 1109, paragraph 2. And she explains that's Christ, gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communicating with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone written by the finger of God. So she's quoting that passage from Exodus. Then she says this, the precious record of the law was placed in the Ark of the Testament and is still there, safely hidden from the human family. And we know where it was from Prophets and Kings. Notice this though, in the next part of this quote, it says, but in God's appointed time, he will bring forth these tables of stone to be a testimony to all the world against the disregard of his commandments and against the idolatrous worship of a counterfeit Sabbath. Now think about that. These tables of stone, which tables are we talking about? Now we know there's a table, a set of commandments, if you like, in heaven. But what Moses received was an exact copy of that. So which tables, which set are we talking about here? Clearly it's these tables which Moses received on Mount Sinai. These tables will be brought forth at a time that God appoints to be a testimony to all the world against a counterfeit Sabbath. Therefore, we can state categorically that those tables of stone that Moses received, that were put in the Ark of the Covenant and were hidden by those men in a cave in Jerusalem, are going to be brought forth at some stage in connection with false worship, idolatrous worship of a counterfeit Sabbath, the mark of the beast issue. That's why this topic is important, because God is going to do something that's going to get the attention of the world. It'll be a testimony to all the world. If we build up prejudice against this discovery, we may inadvertently be blocking off what God is planning to do in the future. And if God brings these forth and people say this is a hoax or a fake, you might be doing the same thing that the Jews did when they rejected the Messiah. We don't want to close any doors. We can't put God in a box. God is at some stage going to bring forth these tables of stone. That's why we need to study this topic very, very carefully. So if the tables of stone are going to come forth, that would indicate at some stage the Ark of the Covenant has to be found. Has it been found? That's a big question. Now it's been claimed that the Ark of the Covenant has been found. Now it'd be very easy to dismiss claims like this, but we need to examine them carefully, knowing that one day God will have the Ark of the Covenant relocated. Now Ron Wyatt claimed to have discovered the Ark in 1982. In 1999, I was part of a group that invited him to Australia. We had large meetings here in Melbourne, and he explained about this discovery amongst other things. And what I'm going to share now is his story as he shared it with us. Just an overview, not the details. There's many websites and books that detail it much more, but here's an overview of Ron's story. Ron was walking one day in the Garden Tomb property, and this is the tomb that we believe matches all the Bible clues. And due to some providential circumstances, he began excavating in a certain spot. How that happened was he was walking along in a particular area. He says his arm involuntarily pointed to a cliff, and out of his mouth came the words, "That's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant is there." Now he was walking at the time with someone from the Antiquities department, and those words that he spoke were involuntary, and I understand he pulled his arm and thought, what made me say that? But the person he was with said, "That's wonderful, we'll provide you with a permit, a place to stay, you can do an excavation," and that in itself was unusual. Now Ron was working in conjunction with the custodian of the tomb at the time, Reverend Bill Wyatt, who gave him permission to do this. The location where he was excavating is between the skull face and the tomb, this promontory by the escarpment there. Now here's a little map, a little drawing of the Garden Tomb property, and where Ron excavated was right beneath these stairs here. Here's a picture where his excavation was, the base of those stairs, and here's some pictures, early pictures of when he and his boys were digging here, excavating. Here's a shot showing part of the excavations. And here's another shot from a little bit later. These two guys are Australians. I've met them, and they told me about their time when they were helping Ron excavate in the Garden Tomb as well. As Ron excavated, he came across, you can see in the back here, these cutouts in the rock. Here's a close-up of that. And Ron wondered if these were the places where the Romans would put signs. Jesus was executed publicly, and the Romans would place, apparently, signs indicating the crimes of the person who was being crucified. And this could be the places where the Romans put signs. And we know in the story in the Bible that Jesus' title, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, was placed in 3 languages. So it could be, Ron suggested, that this is the place where they put signs around the cross to indicate where Jesus is being crucified. Now as he dug down, he came down to the bedrock level through all the rubble that had been there from Jerusalem being destroyed many times, and he found in the solid bedrock holes that had been cut, looked like, to place crosses in. That's interesting. When Ellen White described this in Desire of Ages, it speaks about how when Jesus was nailed to the cross, it was lifted by strong men and with great violence thrust into the place prepared for it. This caused the most intense agony to the Son of God. So the cross was lifted up and thrust into the place prepared for it. There's an interesting quote from Desire of Ages, page 760. It says, "Heaven viewed with grief and amazement Christ hanging upon the cross, blood flowing from his wounded temples, and sweat tinged with blood standing upon his brow. From his hands and feet the blood fell drop by drop upon the rock drilled for the foot of the cross." Do you get that? Clearly this place that had been prepared for the cross was actually rock that had been drilled. And this is what Ron discovered in his excavation. The bedrock had been drilled, places to put the crosses into. Now he discovered in his excavation the foundation of a 1st century building surrounding these cross holes, and inside that building was the edge of a very large stone. According to the radar scans, the diameter of this stone matched the door for the tomb, which is now missing. So it could be, joining the pieces together, that the rolling stone doorway for the tomb was placed in the floor of a building that was built around the cross holes, around the crucifixion site. Now, plugging this central cross hole was a large square stone plug. And here's Ron holding it here. I've held this, it's quite big. It's about 12 to 13 inches square. Now, on the cliff behind where he was excavating, the cliff face there, made of limestone, there's a large crack running all the way through it, all the way up that cliff, right up to the top of the cliff. And here's a shot with Bill Fry on top of the cliff where that crack comes right up. Now the crack went all the way down the other way, right beside that cross hole. Here's a picture showing that crack coming down and the cross hole there. But Ron was looking for the Ark of the Covenant. He wasn't looking for the crucifixion site. After a while, he was impressed to break into the cliff, and he did this and began looking inside this limestone cliff. Now, he would report what he found back to the Antiquities Department, the people he was working with. Here's Ron with some pictures of pottery, reconstructions from bits that he'd found. And he began exploring these natural caves inside this escarpment in this cliff face on the north of Jerusalem. Here's some shots of some of the narrow openings that he was crawling through. A lot of these cave systems are natural water cavities that water was washed out. He said some of them were so narrow he had to breathe out, exhale to squeeze through some of these holes. Here's a photograph looking down a shaft. Very dangerous place to work. He was looking for a chamber or a cave where the ark would be stored. And finally, after 3 years of searching, he wasn't 3 years full time, he'd work in the United States in a hospital, and in his spare time come over and spend a bit of time excavating. He found an entranceway into another chamber. Now he was with a young Arab boy, a small boy, or young Arab man, who he lifted up. He would check out these new discoveries, these new holes. And on this one, when he lifted him up, it was all dark in there. Apparently this young Arab went in there. He was a pretty fearless sort of guy. But he came out with his eyes as wide as anything, saying, "What's in there? What's in there?" And he disappeared right out of the cave system and never came back again. Something terrified him, and that got Ron's interest. So he enlarged the hole, went in there and discovered a cave that was full almost to the ceiling. This is an illustration. Came an entranceway, and inside was rocks and rubble almost to the ceiling. Ron had to crawl along here. Beneath the rocks and rubble were boards, and under the boards were animal skins, and under the animal skins were items of gold. He could shine his torch down. The animal skins had all decayed and crumbled away, but he could see glints of gold. At the back of the cave was a large stone case. Here's an illustration of what that may have looked like. And he realized this could be what he was looking for, the Ark of the Covenant. Now there's a lot more to the story, but in a nutshell, this is the Ark as he found it. This is the description of what he found. Interesting diagram, different to the popular view. He tried to photograph it, and all the pictures came out blurred. Apparently they even had the camera checked, and there was nothing wrong with the camera, so something was fogging the pictures. Here's a diagram illustrating what it looked like. Now the most remarkable aspect to this discovery is this. Above that stone case was a crack running through the ceiling. And that crack went all the way up to the crucifixion site that he'd excavated before. The lid of the case had been broken, and part of it had moved aside. And that crack went all the way up to the crucifixion site, to that cross hole where the crack had run past. And the scenario is this. The Bible tells us that when Christ died on the cross, one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith came there out blood and water. And John says, "He that saw it bear record, and his record is true, and he knoweth that he saith true, that ye might believe." John categorically states this happened. Now the Bible says when Jesus died, there was an earthquake. It says the earth did quake and the rocks were rent. And that crack communicated all the way down from the crucifixion site down through the rock over the Ark of the Covenant. The stone case had a split in it and part of it was moved aside. And when the soldier thrust the spear in Jesus' side, the blood and water flowed down this crack and landed on the lid, the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. To summarize in a nutshell, this is what happened at the crucifixion according to the claims of Ron Wyatt. Very radical. When I first heard this in about 1986, I didn't take it very seriously. But now, having done a lot of research, not only in the Middle East but also study, I'd like to share with you that I think this is actually what happened. I'll give you the evidence for that. So that raises the question, how did the Ark get to where Ron Wyatt found it, north of the city of Jerusalem? Here's a diagram showing the outline of the city of Jerusalem here. This grey area, you can see this grey outline, is Mount Moriah, and the temple was on the south end of Mount Moriah. Now this city wall is above an escarpment that's been cut into Mount Moriah. There's like a dry moat being cut into the city there. And this is what it looks like. This escarpment, this cliff face you can see here, with these layers of limestone, is actually where Mount Moriah has been quarried into. And the city walls were built above that escarpment. So clearly, if you're a soldier defending Jerusalem up here, you've got a great height advantage. Now if you go just off to the picture here, just to the right there, you find a doorway underneath the old city. Here's me standing there, and this is cut into this limestone of Mount Moriah. And next to me is that sign that says King Solomon's Quarries, or Zedekiah's Cave. This is a quarry where limestone has been taken out of the city, well, by tradition, back in the days of Solomon. Of course, we don't know exactly that, but it does make sense. And Zedekiah was actually the king when the Babylonians came down and invaded Jerusalem. Now here's a picture from above showing the outline of this quarry. It covers a huge area. To illustrate, there's a basketball court and there's a tennis court, I think. So that shows the size of this huge quarry. And you can go and visit this today. You can pay your money at the door, go down the steps, and you can see it's all nicely lit. Here's the steps going down into this big quarry. And it opens out to different chambers and caves. You can see it's all nicely lit, so if you can go and visit there, it's quite an interesting place to go to. Right down the bottom, there's this huge open area called the Freemasons' Hall, and apparently the Freemasons used to have a convention there every year. And you can see in places where they've quarried stone blocks. See these cuts here? Where they've quarried blocks of stone from inside this. Here's a picture from about the 1800s when they discovered it. It had been lost for centuries and they discovered it in the 1800s. And again, you can see where stone has been quarried out of this. Now, in one corner of this cave system is a sign put up by the Israeli Antiquities Authority. And this sign talks about how in 1874, not so long after it was discovered, this cave system, a French archaeologist found a carving in the rock depicting an animal with a human head and a winged lion's body. This carving has been removed and it's now in a museum in London. And this is that carving here. You can see where they've chiseled out the rock with that carving on it. And here's a little illustration showing what that carving looks like. What is this? There's a lion's body with wings and a human head. It's effectively one of these. This is a carving from Assyria, the Assyrian culture. There's the lion's body with wings and a human head. And it's interesting, at the time of Jeremiah, when Israel had gone into idolatry, the predominant influence over Israel to lead them into idolatry was the Assyrian culture. So it could be that that carving may be the one referred to in the Apocrypha. Whether this is an accurate record or not, we don't know, but it does seem to tie up that after Jeremiah had hidden the ark in a cave, and stopped the door, in other words, sealed it all up. It says some of those that followed him came to mark the way. So it could be that carving might have been some of these guys that were with Jeremiah decided to carve something to mark the way. And it says when Jeremiah perceived that, he blamed them or told them off, saying, "As for that place, it shall be unknown." Now very close to that carving where it was found, where I'm standing here, is beside a large wall that's been bricked up with large stone blocks. And it's somewhere in this area where the tunnel leads from this quarry out towards where Ron Wyatt excavated. The presence of this tunnel has been confirmed through scanning. It's known, this has been documented. There is a tunnel leading from inside that quarry somewhere. People today don't know where the entranceway is, but it leads out underneath the bus station, heads towards that direction. So here's the scenario. The Babylonian army is coming down to invade and destroy Jerusalem. The men who are working with Jeremiah, with mourning and sadness, we're told, in Prophets and Kings, take the ark out of the city, well, from the temple, through the city, down into this quarry. This is the scenario now. From this quarry, out the tunnel to the cave chamber where they hid it, spoken about in Prophets and Kings. Then they seal it up, come back out here, seal up the entrance to that tunnel, come back out into the city, and perhaps even hide the entrance into the quarry. Now when the Babylonian army came down, besieged Jerusalem, broke into it, they knew what they were looking for. They tore the city to pieces. Remember Nehemiah, when they came back from the captivity, had to rebuild even the walls. Even the walls of the city were torn apart because city walls are quite large. Very easy to make hiding places in city walls. And so the Babylonians tore the walls apart looking for what they knew was in the city. The Ark of the Covenant and other things they hadn't found. And of course, even though they destroyed the city and destroyed the walls, they didn't find it because it wasn't in the city. It had been taken out by this tunnel and actually hidden outside the city. And clearly they never found the tunnel, and the ark was undisturbed since the time it was hidden. I'd like to share something that may be a bit challenging or radical for some, but let's ask an important question. Did the Ark of the Covenant represent the throne of God? Now that's a popular view, that the ark was the throne of God on earth. But you know, we should never be afraid of looking at what inspiration says. Let's have a look at some quotes. It says, "On each end of the mercy seat was fixed a cherub of pure, solid gold. Their faces were turned toward each other and were looking reverentially downward toward the mercy seat." Do you get that? So these angels on the end of the Ark of the Covenant are looking down toward the mercy seat. It says, which represents all the heavenly angels looking with interest and reverence to the law of God deposited in the ark in the heavenly sanctuary. So those angels on the ark looking down are represented as angels looking at the law of God. It doesn't say they're looking at the throne of God, they're looking at the law of God. Now notice where the glory of God actually is. Then I looked, and behold, in the firmament that was above the head of the cherubims, there appeared over them, as it were, a sapphire stone, as the appearance of the likeness of a throne. Here's where the throne is mentioned in connection with these cherubims. And where is the throne according to this? Ezekiel chapter 10. It's over them. Remember, the angels are looking down as if they're looking at the law of God. And over these angels is what? The likeness of a throne. So where is the throne in relation to the Ark of the Covenant? They're not looking at the ark, they're not looking at the throne, they're looking at the law, and the throne is above them. Notice this. Early writings. In the holiest I saw an ark. On the top and sides of it was purest gold. On each end of the ark was a lovely cherub with its wings spread out over it. Their faces were turned toward each other, and they looked downward. Between the angels was a golden censer. Above the ark, where the angels stood, was an exceeding bright glory that appeared like a throne where God dwelt. Now what can we learn from this quote? Where is the bright glory where the throne of God is? It's above the ark. Do you follow that? It's not saying it's the ark itself. In fact, you look in all the Bible and all the spirit of prophecy, you won't find a single quote anywhere that says the ark of the covenant was the throne of God. It seems to indicate that the throne was above the ark. Here's an interesting verse from King David. Remember, King David wanted to build a temple. It says, David the king stood up upon his feet and said, Hear me, my brethren and my people. As for me, I had in mine heart to build an house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord and for the footstool of our God. And he made ready for the building. Here's a verse that connects the ark with the footstool. Now you might say, but hang on, are these maybe two separate things? Well, here's the question. We know what the Ark of the Covenant is. What in the sanctuary was the footstool? If it wasn't the Ark of the Covenant, what piece of furniture was this footstool? I'd say it's one and the same thing. There's not a separate piece of item we know of as a footstool in the most holy place. Here's an interesting verse. We will go into his tabernacles. We will worship at his footstool. Arise, O Lord, into thy rest, thou and the ark of thy strength. What was the central piece of furniture in that sanctuary system? It was the Ark of the Covenant. So when people went to worship at the tabernacle, what was the focal point? The Ark of the Covenant. And what is this verse saying they're worshipping at? God's footstool. Here's another one. Exalt ye the Lord our God and worship at his footstool, for he is holy. I would put to you that the Ark of the Covenant is actually the footstool of God. The throne is above the ark, as inspiration says, and therefore where are God's feet? Here's a little diagram showing a king on his throne and the footstool here. And there's a tradition that says the kings would keep important documents and papers and maybe laws in their footstool, just like we keep music in a piano stool. Important documents were in the footstool because by placing the foot on something it shows authority over it. That being the case, if the ark is God's footstool, whose feet only should ever go on that footstool? I would say only God's feet. And that brings us to the next point. What did the ark look like? Here's some popular depictions of the Ark of the Covenant, showing the box, the right dimensions, and some cherubims on top there on the mercy seat. Here's a model which you can see in Jerusalem. This is from a scale model of the sanctuary, and this is their Ark of the Covenant here. Here's a model in the model shop connected with that one. You can see the priest carrying the ark. The poles are at the bottom here. There's all different ways these are depicted regarding the poles. And on top of the mercy seat are these cherubims. Here's an illustration, a model, I should say, made by the Temple Institute. Now this is a group of Jews who want to build another temple, and they're building all the items and artifacts to go into this temple, and this is their depiction of the Ark of the Covenant. Here's some more models. Poles are in a different position here. All the different options you can find there in Israel. Here's another one. Here's another diagram, an illustration showing the Ark of the Covenant. Again, the cherubims on top. Here's another one with the cherubims on top of the mercy seat like that with their feet on it. Here's the Indiana Jones version. The thing consistent with all of these is they depict the cherubim standing or kneeling on that surface of the mercy seat. If that's God's footstool, I would put to you that that is not an accurate depiction. And when Ron brought out his diagram, this is a drawing done of what he saw, his depiction was quite different, nothing like any of the popular views at all. That was quite a departure from the common view, the popular view. And yet I'm going to suggest to you that that actually is more accurate. Let's look at what the Bible says. Here's a model based on that depiction of Ron's. What does the Bible actually say regarding the Ark of the Covenant? We've got to go back to the Scriptures, because at the end of the day, this is the test of all things. The entrance of thy words giveth light. Now here's the description in the Bible of how the ark was to be made. It says, make one cherub on the one end, and the other cherub on the other end, even of the mercy seat shall he make the cherubims on the two ends thereof. And people say, well, there you go, it's straightforward, isn't it? They're on the mercy seat. Well, the Hebrew word there for on is this one here. It's al. And it has a number of meanings. It's a little bit like the English word on. The word on in English can mean several things. I can say, for example, this laptop is on this piece of furniture here. This TV is on this table here, and you understand what I'm saying. But if I said to you, I've got 4 wheels on my car, what would you think I mean? Are they on the roof, or are they on the sides? I can say I've got shoes on my feet. If I said to you, I've got my shoes on, where are they? Are they here? Or are they actually underneath me? If I said to you, I saw an aeroplane go over and there were 2 wings on that aeroplane, where are the wings? Are they sticking out of the roof? Or are they coming out of the sides? You have to understand the context to know what that means. And the Hebrew word is the same. This on can mean several things. It can mean beside. It can mean up against. It doesn't necessarily mean above on the top surface. And you can see this when you follow the word through the Bible. For example, in Exodus 12, verse 7, when the people put the blood on the side posts and on the upper post, picture the Jews painting blood, if you like, on their doorposts. That's the same word, on. It's against the side. Does that make sense? Here's another case where people fasten swords upon, that's the same word, Hebrew word al, his loins. They put their swords on. Here's another one. Every man has a sword upon his thigh. So when they put their sword on, it was here, at the side of them. So that word on in Hebrew can mean on top of, and it can mean at the sides of. It allows for both. Now what about the ends? It says make one cherub on the end, one end, and the one cherub on the other end. Now the word there, end, literally means, you can look this up, termination or edge. So therefore this makes perfect sense. These cherubims are beside or attached to the edge or termination of the mercy seat. If this surface is the top surface of God's footstool, only God's feet should go on this mercy seat here, and the angels are beside the ark there. And in fact, that's exactly what inspiration says. The ark of the earthly sanctuary was the pattern of the true ark in heaven. In other words, the one on earth was patterned or modelled after the true ark in heaven. It's to look the same. It says there, beside the heavenly ark, stand living angels. Do you get that? So where are the angels in heaven? Are they standing on the mercy seat or kneeling on the mercy seat? No, it says beside the heavenly ark stand living angels, each one with one wing overshadowing the mercy seat and stretched forth on high, while the other wings are folded over their forms. So do you get that? One wing is covering themselves and the other stretched forth. Therefore, Ron's diagram is in perfect accordance with what we read in inspiration. That, I think, is a telling thing in favour of Ron's discovery, because this is what you'd expect if you study what inspiration says about the Ark of the Covenant. This makes perfect sense. Big question, what is the significance of this discovery? I believe there's 2 key areas where we can show that this discovery actually fits Bible perfectly. One of those is the way the covenant was being ratified, and the other one is to do with the claims of the law being satisfied. Now we'll work through both of these 2 points. This is the theological proof, if you like, of this discovery. One more point I'd like to make about this before we come into this. We as Adventists know that in 1844, Jesus went from the holy place to the most holy place in the heavenly sanctuary. How do we know this? What's the evidence for this? Are there any photographs? Are there any video footage? Was there any TV coverage of this event? No, of course not. We base this upon Scripture, and it's rock solid. The verse, Daniel 8:14, under 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And we go back to Leviticus 16, what was the cleansing of the sanctuary. You join those together and we have an understanding of what happened in 1844. It's based on biblical evidence and it's rock solid. I would put to you that there is as much evidence for this discovery as there is for 1844. Using Bible evidence alone, we can show that what Ron Wyatt claimed makes sense biblically. And we'll look at those 2 points right now. First of all, the ratification of the covenant. How did Moses ratify the old covenant? And then we're going to look at the antitype of that, the fulfillment of that. God took the Hebrews, the children of Israel, to Mount Sinai. And here, God was going to form a covenant with his people. Moses was the go-between. Moses came, it says, told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has said will we do. So to ratify this covenant, they had a special ceremony. Moses had written down what God had instructed him, and Moses took this book of the covenant and read it in the audience of the people. And it says, they replied and said, all that the Lord has said will we do and be obedient. So they had this covenant read out to them, and they said, yes, we will be obedient. So they then ratified this covenant, this agreement between God and the people of Israel. And how this was done is explained in Hebrews chapter 9. Paul here says, when Moses had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and of goats with water. Now notice that, blood and water being used here. And scarlet wool and hyssop. So it appears that he made, with this hyssop, which is a plant, a branch, a little brush perhaps. Because what he did with this was, it says he sprinkled both the book and all the people, saying, this is the blood of the testament which God hath enjoined unto you. So with this little brush, he sprinkled the people and then sprinkled the book, essentially saying, these people are agreeing to abide by this covenant, this book here. That's how they ratified the old covenant. Now, how was that fulfilled for the new covenant? All this was done as a type and shadow. Moses didn't just wake up that morning and think, oh, what shall we do today? Why don't we do this? No, God was instructing him step by step to help him know, because all of this was typical, it was prophetic. Now Jeremiah spoke about this new covenant that was coming. He said, behold, the days come, says the Lord, that I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, but this shall be the covenant that I'll make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. And what is it? I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. God's law is going to be written in the heart, not just on tables of stone. Now, everything in the old covenant was foreshadowing the new covenant. Moses was the go-between in the old covenant between the people and God. Who was the go-between in the new covenant? Jesus, of course. The Bible spells this out very plainly. Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. Now, it's important to note that a covenant comes into effect after the testator dies. Paul brings this out in Hebrews. It says, where a testament is, there must also of necessity be the death of the testator. We can understand that. Like if you have a last will and testament, somebody goes to a lawyer and writes a will. They explain what they would like to have happen when they die. When is that will carried out and put into effect? After the person dies. Does that make sense? Someone can go to a lawyer, write a will, but that will only sits on the shelf or in a filing cabinet until the person whose will it is passes away. That's the death of the testator, and then that will comes into force. As Paul says here in Hebrews, for a testament is a force after men are dead, otherwise it is of no strength at all while the testator liveth. Now, who was the testator of the New Testament. Clearly that was Jesus. So when was the death of the testator of the New Testament? That was at Calvary. So Jesus, dying on the cross, was bringing in the New Testament. And what happened, as we know from the Bible, one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and out came blood and water. And notice what John says. He that saw it bare record, and his record is true, and he knoweth that he saith true, that ye might believe. John is saying, believe it, I saw it. Blood and water came out of Christ's side. Why is that significant? Because what Moses did in the Old Covenant was foreshadowing this event. Now, did that blood and water simply spill on the ground? Big question. We only have to ask, what did Moses do with the blood and water that he used? Remember, he sprinkled it on the law, the covenant that God was expecting the people to keep. That's why this discovery makes so much sense. Here's Christ dying on the cross. Blood and water comes out to ratify the new covenant. Where did that blood and water go? Down the crack and landed on the mercy seat. Just as Moses sprinkled the law that the Hebrews are expected to keep, what law does God expect us to keep in the new covenant? It's not the sacrificial law. It's not this book of the covenant that Moses wrote. It's the 10 Commandments. It's going to be written in our heart. So here was Christ dying on the cross. He died, the spear went in, the blood and water came out. The same two things that Moses used to ratify the old covenant comes down, sprinkles over the law, and ratifies the 10 Commandments as part of the new covenant. If we don't have that scenario, we don't have an antitype for what Moses did. This is the perfect antitype. Here's the 10 Commandments being ratified as part of the new covenant. Now some people have said, but wait on, it's landing on the mercy seat, not the law. Well, this Ark of the Covenant, what was its purpose? Here was the beautiful Ark of the Covenant, magnificent piece of equipment. But what was its purpose? Its purpose was to hold the 10 Commandments. In fact, that whole beautiful gold box, what was its purpose only? And here's a great quote from the Spirit of Prophecy. The Ark was merely a receptacle for the tables of the law. Do you get that? And the presence of these divine precepts gave to it its value and sacredness. The purpose of the ark was merely to hold the 10 Commandments. And so when that blood came down and landed on the mercy seat, remember those angels looking down, representing the angels looking at the law of God? Here comes the blood on the mercy seat, representing the blood going over the law. So that covenant was ratified. That law that God had written in stone was ratified as part of the new covenant. It's that law that he wants to write in our hearts in the new covenant. It's the same law. Now some people have objected, saying, but wait on, that ark was a typical ark. It was made for the Mosaic system. The real ark is in heaven. You're mixing the reality, Christ's blood, with a typical ark which was built for the Mosaic system. On the surface, yes, but again, what's inside the ark? It's the tables of stone. And these tables of stone are not a type or a shadow. Let me show you the quote that shows that. When God wrote on stone with his own finger that 10 Commandment law, that law was not a shadow, was not a type. Notice these quotes from the Spirit of Prophecy. There is no shadow in the precepts of the Decalogue. The 10 Commandments are not a type. When type met antitype in the death of Christ, the sacrificial offering ceased. The ceremonial law was done away, but by the crucifixion, the law of 10 Commandments was established. You understand, in that whole sanctuary system that Moses built, all of it was typical and foreshadowing the future, except one thing, and that was the law inside the Ark of the Covenant. Everything else was man-made. But the tables of stone written by God's own finger was not a shadow. It was not man-made. It was not typical. It's an exact copy of the one in heaven. So when Christ's blood went down through the crack onto the mercy seat over the law, it was antitype meeting antitype. There's no shadow in the law. It's the reality meeting the reality. Christ's blood went down and ratified that law as part of the new covenant. There's another aspect that I believe from the Bible that confirms what Ron Wyatt said, and that's the Day of Atonement. Now, Ron claims that when Jesus died, Christ's blood went down a crack and landed on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, in the Jewish system, that was done once a year. They put blood on that mercy seat, and we find this in Leviticus 16. They took the goat, which represent the Lord. It says, the goat of the sin offering, and bring his blood within the veil and sprinkle it upon the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. So here is where once a year blood was put on that mercy seat. Typifying what? Well, let's have a look at that. What was this special day when that was done? This was the Day of Atonement. And the Bible says it's on that day that the priest shall make an atonement for you to cleanse you, that you may be cleaned from all your sins before the Lord. Notice that. It was that specific day when they were cleansed from their sins. Let's understand why this cleansing was necessary. Let's go through what the Bible says. And let's look at the cleansing of the sanctuary on the Day of Atonement. First of all, why did the sanctuary need to be cleansed in the first place? It was a holy place, and in fact, before the priests went into the sanctuary, they had to wash at the laver. Did it need to be cleansed or like spring cleaned from all the dust and dirt? No, not at all. In fact, they washed their feet before entering there. We're talking about ceremonially cleansed. Now here's how it worked. All during the year, people could bring a sin offering. If they'd committed a sin, they've got a problem. The wages of sin is death, we're told. And what's sin? It's transgression of the law. So if somebody had broken the law, they had a problem, they had guilt, they had sin, they had to deal with that. And here's the process that God gave the Hebrews. They would bring a sin offering, a little lamb that had done nothing wrong. And they would bring it to the courtyard here. They would confess their sins over that lamb. And so the guilt was transferred to that lamb. Here's the verse that talks about this. If any one of the common people doeth somewhat against any of the commandments of the Lord, then he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats. And if he bring a lamb for a sin offering, he shall bring it a female without blemish. The solution was they would use a young lamb or a goat to remove the sin from the sinner. And here's the text. He shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering and slay it for a sin offering in the place where they kill the burnt offerings. So by placing his hand on the head of this animal, the guilt was symbolically transferred onto that lamb. Then the lamb would take the punishment that that person deserved. The transgressor would take its life, and then it would be burnt on the altar of burnt offerings there. And the priest would take some of the blood and put it on the horns of that altar of burnt offering. But that wasn't the end of the process by any stretch of the imagination. If a soul shall sin, the priest shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle. So some of the blood from that sin offering had to come into the tabernacle, and it was placed on the horns of the altar of incense. We read this in Patriarchs and Prophets. Just before the veil, separating the holy place from the most holy and the immediate presence of God, stood the golden altar of incense. Upon this altar, the priest was to burn incense every morning and evening. Its horns were touched with the blood of the sin offering, and it was sprinkled with blood on the great Day of Atonement. So blood was touched on the horns of this altar during the year. The sin offerings that people brought, the blood was taken in and put on the horns of that altar, and then again on the great Day of Atonement. So what did it mean to take the blood from that animal that had sin confessed on it? The blood was taken and put on the horns of this altar. That was transferring the sin, if you like, from the person to the lamb to the blood via the priest and put on the horns of this altar. It's interesting, in Jeremiah we read this. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron and with the point of a diamond. It is graven upon the table of their heart and upon the horns of your altars. So where was the sin recorded? On those horns. So that's why the sanctuary needed to be cleansed. That record of sin had been taken in via the blood from those sin offerings and put on the horns inside the sanctuary. That sanctuary needed to be cleansed. So let's have a look at how this was done on the Day of Atonement. Now these are the 6 key steps on the Day of Atonement. There's a bit more to it, but this is the 6 key points. The priest would take 2 goats. It says, take of the congregation of the children of Israel 2 kids of the goats. Aaron shall cast lots upon the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. So one of those 2 goats would become the Lord's goat, the other would become the scapegoat. Then the priest would take the Lord's goat. It says, Aaron shall bring the goat upon which the Lord's lot fell and offer him for a sin offering. No sin was confessed on this, but it was offered for a sin offering. It says, he shall kill the goat of the sin offering and bring his blood within the veil and sprinkle it upon the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. So here comes the priest. He's killed this lamb of this goat of the sin offering, brings it straight in and puts it on the mercy seat. Then, once he's done that, he does something else. The process is not finished yet. He shall go out unto the altar that is before the Lord. This is the altar of incense in the first apartment. And shall take of the blood and put it upon the horns of the altar round about. He shall sprinkle the blood upon it with his finger 7 times and cleanse it and hallow it from the uncleanness of the children of Israel. Here's the cleansing of the sanctuary. This is the cleansing process. So when the priest had put blood on the mercy seat, he came back out and put blood on the horns of this altar here to cleanse it. This is the cleansing mentioned in Leviticus 16. Now once he's done that, once he's made an end of reconciling the holy place and the tabernacle of the congregation and the altar, he then goes and gets the other goat. Aaron lays his hand upon the head of the live goat and confesses over him all the iniquities of the children of Israel and all their transgressions, putting them upon the head of the goat. So all the sins that have been committed during the year, they're now put onto this goat. And this goat is sent away into the wilderness by the hand of a fit man, it says. And that goat shall bear upon him all their iniquities to a land not inhabited. So he's taken away by this fit man to the wilderness. Now some may suggest, does that represent Jesus? No, because the Bible says, without the shedding of blood there is no remission. This scapegoat that's led off into the wilderness doesn't have its blood shed. Without the shedding of blood there's no remission. So clearly this is not Christ. This is a representation of Satan. In fact, we're told this quite plainly. The scapegoat was sent away into a land not inhabited, never to come again into the congregation of Israel. So will Satan be forever banished from the presence of God and his people. He will be blotted from existence in the final destruction of sin and sinners. So here's a summary of the Day of Atonement, the 6 key steps. 2 goats are selected by lot. One becomes the Lord's goat, the other becomes a scapegoat. The Lord's goat is slain, its blood shed, and that blood is taken straight away into the most holy place and placed over the law on the mercy seat. Then the priest takes that blood, the remainder, and puts it on the horns of this altar to cleanse it from all the sins that have been put there during the year. Once that's done, he then deals with the scapegoat. He gets blamed for everything, the sins are put on him, and he's taken out in the wilderness to die. Now what do these represent? Clearly, we understand Satan being dealt with here. This is the millennium. For 1,000 years he's going to wander the earth. So this is the millennium pictured here, when Satan will wander this earth. Nothing to do. What does number 2 represent? Now this is the Lord's goat shedding its blood and forfeiting its life. Clearly this is Calvary. Jesus dying on the cross here. So you can see here in the Day of Atonement, we've got a whole sweep all the way from Calvary right through to the millennium. Now people say the antitypical Day of Atonement is from 1844 onwards. Well, that's a partial truth. The reality is the Day of Atonement compassed all the way from Calvary to the millennium. It's a big sweep. Now here's a question. When did this happen? And when does this happen? Let's have a careful look at that. When the priest took blood in and sprinkled it over the law, straight after that goat had been slain, what was that symbolizing? What does the action of blood going on the mercy seat accomplish? What is that doing? Why did the priest do that? This is a crucial question to understand this. And we don't have to guess or doubt. Patriarchs and prophets. It says, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest, having taken an offering for the congregation, went into the most holy place with the blood and sprinkled it upon the mercy seat above the tables of the law. This is the priest with the blood of the Lord's goat, sprinkling it on the mercy seat. And what was the purpose of this? It says, thus the claims of the law which demanded the life of the sinner were satisfied. Inside that Ark of the Covenant was the law of God. And the definition of sin is transgression of the law. And the Bible says the wages of sin is death. The law says if the law here gets broken, the penalty is death. So here's the Lord demanding the death of all the sinners because they've broken the law. Demanding the life, if you like. The law demands the life be forfeit by the sinner. So the priest comes in, he sprinkles blood over the law, saying to the law, here's the blood symbolizing the life, are you satisfied? And the law says, I'm satisfied now. So that action of sprinkling the blood over the law was to satisfy the claims of the law. What does that sprinkling action symbolize? The actual blood drop sprinkling. What does inspiration say? It says the sprinkling of the blood represented the shedding of the blood of Jesus, by which human beings are cleansed from sin. So that sprinkling action, dropping blood drops, symbolizes Jesus shedding his blood. It's interesting, inspiration says the warm blood was sprinkled upon the mercy seat. Why do you think Ellen White goes to the effort of saying warm blood? It shows it was done immediately. As soon as that blood had been shed, it was sprinkled on the mercy seat. It was still warm. Now you might ask, why blood? Well, of course, we know. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. It's the blood that makes atonement for the soul. Now here's the question. All of that action by the priest every year, year by year, doesn't actually forgive any sin. Paul says this, for the law, speaking about the sacrificial law, having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually, make the comers thereunto perfect. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and of goats should take away sins. All the action by the priest every year was only a type and shadow. It was illustrating what Christ was going to do. All of those animals that died was pointing forward to Jesus' death on the cross. It's only Jesus can take away guilt. Now here's the question. We know that when Jesus died, the spear went and out came blood and water. What happened to that blood and water? Ellen White says in Desire of Ages, from the wound thus made there flowed two copious and distinct streams, one of blood, the other of water. This was noted by all the beholders, and John states the occurrence very definitely. You can read that in John 19 verse 35. He that saw it bear record, and his record is true. Why does John stress this so much? Because he's saying, I saw it, believe it, it really happened. Now here's the question. If that action of the priest was to satisfy the claims of the law, when did Jesus fulfill that? When did Jesus satisfy the claims of the law for you and me? This is a big question. And the answer is given quite clearly here. Christ on the cross has satisfied justice. He has proffered himself as an atonement. His gushing blood. Now when did Jesus' blood gush? It was from the spear wound. His gushing blood, his broken body, satisfy the claims of the law, and thus he bridges the gulf which sin has made. It was on Calvary. And here's another quote says the same thing. No sin can be committed by man for which satisfaction has not been met on Calvary. Thus the cross, in earnest appeals, continually proffers to the sinner a thorough expiation. What blood was it that redeems us? This is a big question. It's the gushing blood that satisfies the claims of the law. Now looking at the type, how were the claims of the law satisfied? by the priests. What did the Jewish system, which God gave them, teach? It's when the priests sprinkled the blood over the law onto the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant that the claims of the law were satisfied. It's the gushing blood from Jesus that satisfies the claims of the law for us on Calvary. So that action of the priest sprinkling blood on the mercy seat was actually fulfilled by Calvary. This is what inspiration tells us. In fact, when Jesus comes back, here's an interesting prophecy from Habakkuk. As Jesus comes back in all his glory, it says he had bright beams coming out of his side, and there was the hiding of his power. That's the marginal reading for that. Now, Ellen White quotes that. The margin, she quotes that passage, the marginal reading, beholding Christ in his glory, he had bright beams coming out of his side, there was the hiding of his power. Notice what she says. That pierced side, whence flowed the crimson stream that reconciled man to God, there is the Saviour's glory, there the hiding of his power. Now think about that. Notice how this begins. Upon his wounded head, upon his side, his hands and his feet are the traces of the cruel work. Jesus felt all of that. When the nails were going in his hands, when the nails went in his feet, when the crown of thorns was thrust on his head, he felt all of that. He must have been tempted to give up on mankind and do away with them, forget about them. This is too hard. But he hung in there. He said, I'm going to go all the way and save mankind. To his glory, he suffered all of that for us. But the pierced side, when the spear went in, was after he had died. Jesus died and then the spear went in. He never felt that spear wound. He was unconscious. He was dead. So that was never part of his sufferings. And yet we're told it's the blood from that pierced side that reconciles us back to God. It wasn't part of his sufferings. So according to the type, what had to happen to that blood, which Jesus never felt, and yet that's the blood that redeems us? It's the blood that paid the price. It's the blood that satisfied the claims of the law. According to the type, it had to go on to the mercy seat above the law to satisfy the claims of the law. That's what happened at Calvary. Exactly as Ron Wyatt described, the blood had to go on the mercy seat over the law to satisfy the claims of the law for us. Well, that raises the question, what is Jesus doing right now? And how does that relate to 1844? It's quite simple. Now, some misconstrue this text here. We also join God through our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom we have now received the atonement, Romans 5:11. Now some may say, but wait on, are you saying that the atonement was complete on the cross? No, and here's the reason why. You need to understand what the atonement is. What is Jesus doing right now? If you look at Leviticus 16, after the priest sprinkles blood upon the mercy seat, it makes an atonement for the holy place, but that wasn't the end of the atonement, because then it says he should go out unto the altar that's before the Lord and make an atonement for it. The atonement didn't finish with the blood going on the mercy seat. Putting blood on the horns of the altar of incense was part of the atonement process. This is very important to understand. The text that we know as Adventists is this one. Under 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So how does that relate to what Jesus is doing right now? We know that this began in 1844. So what is Jesus doing in heaven right now? It says 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. The Bible says, Christ that died, yea, rather that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who also makes intercession for us. What does this mean? Inspiration is clear here in this quote from View and Herald. Our Saviour has come and shed his blood as a sacrifice, and now he pleads that blood before his Father in the sanctuary above. Christ is not still shedding his blood. He's pleading the blood that he shed 2,000 years ago. And he's today standing where? At the altar of incense, presenting before God the prayers of those who desire his help. So he's pleading before the Father, and then he's at the altar of incense. He pleads before the Father, and then he's at the altar of incense where the sins are being blotted out. And this is the process we see in Daniel 7. I watched until thrones were set in place and the Ancient of Days sat. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. Some translations say the court was seated and the books were opened. The court began its session and the books were opened. The court convened and the books were opened. The judge is seated and the books have been opened. And behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. This is the advocate Jesus coming into this court scene, where he's pleading on our behalf before the Father. Christ is ready and willing and waiting to forgive us our sins. There's a Bible text that says, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And he'd like to cleanse us from all unrighteousness to the point where he can finish that work and come back and redeem his people. So it falls onto us to say, Lord, help us overcome that you can finish your work in the sanctuary and come back and take us home to heaven. So on that thought, I plead with you, brothers and sisters, let's work with Christ as he's there as our advocate in heaven, working on the atonement, the completing of the atonement in heaven.